Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas was released on October 29, 1993. With a tight budget of $18 million, Nightmare has since made great returns, to the tune of $91.5 million. Creator Tim Burton, a native of Burbank, California, has explained that the perpetual sun in his home state disallowed for any real noticeable changes to mark the transition of seasons. It was during such an otherwise innocuous break from autumn to winter of 1982, that the melding of Halloween and Christmas store decorations inspired Burton, who was working as an animator for Walt Disney Studios, between projects like The Fox and the Hound and the Black Cauldron, to write a poem which he entitled The Nightmare Before Christmas, and which was fashioned after Clement Clarke Moore's A Visit from St. Nicholas, also known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. With the success of Vincent in the same year, Burton began to consider developing Nightmare as either a short film or a half-hour television special, in the style of the old low-budget stop-motion staples of Rankin Bass like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, with inspirations from the illustrations of Ronald Searle and Edward Gorey, to no avail. Burton pitched Nightmare to Disney in 1983, but Disney felt that Nightmare had no relationship to its identity at the time. Ironically, it was at this very time that Disney's output was slightly waning, as their spate of musicals failed to invigorate the market. And still, they said of Nightmare that it was too weird. Only after Burton had completed Beetlejuice and Batman, and indeed while he was already working on Batman Returns, did his superstardom play into Nightmare's genesis. But Disney stalled Burton's efforts to take Nightmare into his own hands and, since they still own Nightmare, convinced Burton to come back to Disney, so that they could let him make it. Walt Disney Studios still believed, however, that the film would be too dark and scary for kids, and so they released it through Touchstone Pictures. According to director Henry Selick, Burton never really enjoyed directing stop motion. He was nervous about being on set too much, so he approached Selick with the request to direct. While Burton definitely had his hand in all of the film, Selick would end up taking on the bulk of its development as the project's lead director. In 1990, Burton solidified a development deal with Disney, and production began in July 1991. The film would go on to receive critical acclaim, nominated, even, for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, a first for an animated film, being forever ingrained into the cult classic culture of movie lovers and obviously into the heart of every 90s kid. Studio work. The film is composed of 109,440 frames. This is 24 frames to a second, meaning that the characters were posed 24 times for every second of the completed film. A parallel perspective is that 1 minute of Nightmare required an entire week of filming. Such a process took the film more than 3 years to complete. Set designer Greg Olson built a quarter-scale mock-up of Halloween Town as a model for the real set. The actual set was 4 times larger, about 24 feet in length. Special breaks were built into the set, so that it could come apart as needed, because, as a whole, it simply would not fit into the stages themselves. In order to satisfy animators' requests that they not be made to reach their arms any further than 2 feet into the set, Olson made sure that the set was for the most part not any taller than 2 feet. However, in the cases where this could not be avoided, the set was equipped with trapdoors, so that animators could pop up and animate the characters from beneath and from within the structure itself. There was a total of 230 sets. Though Burton's original story centered around only 3 characters, Nightmare ended up featuring more than 60 individual characters, each with 3 or 4 duplicates, making the total number of puppets closer to 200. For the framework of each puppet was also designed a unique armature, to enable flexible movement. Production included over 100 specially trained camera operators, puppet makers, set builders, and prop makers. Though the sets were of course built in miniature, they were indeed lit up just like full-size movie sets, many sets requiring up to 30 lights to serve dramatic effect. A total 19 sound stages. A total 13 animators. A total of 8 camera crews. The sculpture department itself consisted of only 4 people, including Burton's creative partner, Rick Heinrichs, who was hugely responsible for sculpting much of everything. One of the sculpting feats of Nightmare was that of Oogie Boogie. Because of the particularly huge and shapeless nature of Oogie Boogie, he was the toughest character to design. After drawing and sculpting Oogie Boogie, he had to be fully built, complete with skin. But when Oogie Boogie gets his skin pulled off and he is revealed to be composed only of bugs, Heinrich had to resculpt him. So many bugs were needed, that it was asked of everyone working on the film to make bugs in their spare time. Completing this Oogie Boogie bug scene alone took 4 months. If at any time there was a problem discovered with any frame, that entire frame would have to be rephotographed. One scene that was completely rephotographed, not because of error, but because of a studio note, was the scene featuring the clown with the tearaway face. Initially, when the clown tore away his face, beneath was featured a bloody and awful mess, and director Selick agreed to simply replace the bloody mess with a hollow head. Conflict. Only a couple of disagreements resulted in stories from the old rumor mill. Going back to the Oogie Boogie scene, apparently director Henry Selick desired for Oogie Boogie to not be a swarm of bugs, but instead to be revealed as a machination of Dr. Finkelstein, who operated Oogie Boogie from within. Burton disagreed so vehemently, it is said that he actually kicked a hole into a wall. Jack the Pumpkin King, Skellington. A more innocent disagreement centered around none other than the Pumpkin King, Jack Skellington himself, who can actually be seen in various forms in cameos from earlier films like Vincent. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. As he was fully formed for Nightmare, though, the studio made the request that eyeballs be created for Jack's eye sockets. Both Selick and Burton simply ignored them, Selick saying, "We were never going to do that." So since he had no eyeballs, in order to make Jack blink, replacement series were wedged into his eye sockets, which took up to 3 frames per blink. But of course, it wasn't just about how he looked, but how he sounded. Danny Elfman, of Simpsons fame, to say the very least, composed the score for Nightmare. It was in 1985 that he was approached by Tim Burton and Paul Reubens to write the score for Pee-wee's Big Adventure, thus beginning the fruitful business relationship, leading to the renowned score of Nightmare and the unmistakable tenor of The Pumpkin King. Danny Elfman's role as Jack Skellington was the only time he played a character in a movie for which he also composed the score. And on that note, Elfman actually didn't have a script from which he could base his score, but simply created the songs from rudimentary conversations with Burton about the story that had yet to be fully written. Basically, Burton would describe a scene to Elfman, and Elfman would compose a song based off that description, the first composition for Nightmare being What's This? Elfman did also offer his voice as the speaking voice of Jack, but his singing voice outshone his speaking voice so much so that a different voice actor was sought for the speaking role of the Pumpkin King. Enter Chris Sarandon. But the voice wasn't the only part of the Pumpkin King's identity to go through a deviation or two. More than 400 distinctly different Jack Skellington heads were used to help the eyeless Jack emote, all ping pong balls, repurposed. Still, the most meticulous of efforts featuring Jack was the very short scene of the opening of the door to Christmas Town. It is the close-up of the shiny golden knob that reflects Jack and the rest of the forest that took the most time, care, and attention. Sally's legs. Not without issue, at one point, Sally was designed to stumble as she walked. Animators tried to make her walk in a wobbly, uncertain fashion, to accentuate her ragdoll nature, but she ended up looking more like a drunkard, and the concept was dropped. Speaking of Sally's legs, the original doll's ankles were so thin, she could not come to a complete stop, so they made the ankles thicker, and put socks on her to hide the imperfection. Sally so extra, because her long red hair made it difficult to change her head out the same way that they exchanged the ping pong heads of the Pumpkin King. For Sally was created a mask for every single change of expression. Oh, Santa! Santa was originally poised to be voiced by the late Vincent Price, the renowned stage, television, and radio actor, he of various horror movie honors and 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Tragically, Price's wife passed away on the heels of production. Selick was worried that Price's sadness would be felt or heard through his vocal performance, and sought to recast, with Santa's joyousness in focus. As Selick explained, "We recorded him and he would have done the introduction to the film, since it's supposed to be Santa Claus's voice at the beginning end, but had just lost his wife, and he was despondent, and it just didn't work. He was the first choice, that didn't work out, and we met with Don Ameche. Apparently, the handsome Don Ameche, actor, comedian, and vaudevillian, was insanely grouchy, according to Selick. I couldn't believe how grouchy he was. Then we met with James Earl Jones, and Danny had a weird moment where he went up to him and said he'd written the part especially for James Earl Jones, and James Earl Jones got very angry and yelled, 'You don't know me.' It was a very tough voice to cast, and we just went with a local actor from San Francisco." Both Price and Ameche passed away the same year that Nightmare was completed and released. Another actor who did not make it into the final cut of the film is Sir Patrick Stewart, who was originally slated to perform the role of Nightmare's narrator. Easter eggs. While Jack has since been featured as an Easter egg in many films since Nightmare, Disney Easter eggs can also be found in Nightmare itself, including the evil versions of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck that are discovered by children wearing pajamas donning those very characters in Christmas Town. Another Easter egg was cut from the film, which featured a cameo of Tim Burton, or rather, Tim Burton's head, which was to be used as a hockey puck by the Little Monsters of Halloween Town. Elfman's head, however, did make it into the film, as a distinct red-headed adornment found within the base of the Halloween Town band's bass player. Sequel talks. In 2001, Disney began to consider producing a sequel, but rather than using stop motion, Disney wanted to use computer animation. Tim Burton rejected Disney's idea of a CGI sequel, later explaining, "I was always very protective of it, not wanting to do sequels like Jack Visits Thanksgiving World, or other kinds of things. Just because I felt the movie had a purity to it and the people that like it, because it's a mass market kind of thing, it was important to kind of keep that purity of it." It is reported that Disney also fancied a Nightmare Before Christmas ride at Disneyland, which was purportedly met by the same denial, Burton owning 50% of the rights to the characters. In 2009, Selick said he would do a film sequel if he and Burton could create a good story for it. 10 years later, in 2019, it was reported that a new Nightmare Before Christmas film was in the works, with Disney considering either a stop-motion sequel or live-action remake. That same year, Chris Sarandon expressed interest in reprising his role as Jack Skellington if a sequel film ever does materialize. 90s kids and kids of all ages have a special attachment to Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, and with Disney charging forward with remakes and sequels and live-action adaptations, the 90s program definitely understands how anyone might be wary of any reiteration or continuation of a project so close to our hearts. But still, a well-done Pumpkin King sequel might just be the niche that Disney is missing in the current market, and even one that film lovers are looking for. What do you think? Leave a comment and share this video. Thank you for following the 90s program.